Then a little alarm bell should have gone off in my head, and I should then have gone on and said to my permanent secretary, look, by the way, I have this loan, I am the Secretary of State. People might put those two things together and may feel that, you know, it's unacceptable. Now, I should have foreseen that.
Well, and I should have explain now why the alarm bell didn't go off.
I can't explain, no.
Even Blairite loyalists have been heard to complain that their leader has often seemed too dependent on Peter Mandelson.
The Prime Minister will continue to take advice from Mr Mandelson, although perhaps he won't acknowledge it publicly.
When will Mr Mandelson be back? When will you rehabilitate him? Does he have a future in the Cabinet again?
Peter Mandelson's resigned. That's all I intend to say.
So you left the door open for him, or you appeared to.
The future will take care of itself, but I'm not going to speculate on it.
It was last night, as he did the rounds of the TV studios, that Peter Mandelson realised that he'd become such a liability to the government he'd done more than anyone else to fashion that he would have to resign. Once the interviews were over, he telephoned Tony Blair and told him that he felt wretched and angry with his own lack of judgment and that he wanted to resign. Mr Blair, preparing for Christmas, urged him to sleep on the decision, but did not attempt to dissuade him. This morning, Mr Mandelson was saying nothing, but his mind was made up, reinforced no doubt by the worst headlines since the government was elected, and all too aware as a master of the media that the press would go on pursuing him as relentlessly as they did the former Welsh Secretary. He was managing not to show his emotions, but he was apparently devastated and very upset when at 10 o'clock he phoned the Prime Minister at Chequers to tell him that in the cold light of day he still wanted to resign. Mr Blair, though saddened at losing his closest ally, agreed with Mr Mandelson that the only way to stem the damage to the government was for him to resign. His letter of resignation only hinted at the emotions on both sides. Peter Mandelson said, "I can scarcely believe I am writing this letter to you. I should have not, with all candour, have entered into the arrangement. I should, having done so, told you and other colleagues." Replying, Mr Blair hinted at an eventual comeback for his friend. "It is no exaggeration to say that without your support and advice, we would never have built New Labour. Since there has been a misjudgment on your part, then, as you said to me, we can't be like the last lot." But he added, "In the future, you will achieve much, much more with us." Mr Blair moved quickly to replace Mr Mandelson at the Department of Industry with Stephen Byers, who, after his remarks about trade unions 2 years ago, is regarded by the left with almost as much suspicion as Mr Mandelson. His job at the Treasury, which is seen by some Blairites as the source of the original leak about Mr Mandelson, is being taken by another moderniser. Mr Mandelson was still being pursued by the media tonight, but in accepting his resignation so quickly, Mr Blair is hoping to draw a contrast with the way ministers in the last government clung on to office. But Mr Mandelson's departure will leave a vacuum at the strategic heart of government, which he will find difficult to fill.
By mid-afternoon and the last interviews, the brutal changeover had already started. Stephen Byers given Mr Mandelson's job at DTI, Alan Milburn replacing Mr Byers as Treasury number 2. The clearing of the ex-Trade Secretary's belongings had begun. The cards, the other personal belongings packed away. This is explanation of his going.
New Labour was elected saying that after all this time, all these years of falling standards in public life, we were going to make a real difference. And therefore, I think for this government in particular, we not only have to act properly and behave properly, as I believe I have done, but on all occasions be seen to act properly. And I feel that as a result of my actions or the way in which they were presented, people would have concluded that we had fallen below the standards, and I had fallen below the standards expected of this government, and I felt it necessary to pay a very big price for that.
People have expressed amazement that you, as they put it, the master of spin, didn't see the risk in perhaps even having so huge a loan, point one, and having taken it from Geoffrey Robinson, point two.
I think I didn't think about it, didn't think it through, didn't focus, on the implications, the way in which it would look to the public in the way that I should have done. And in that sense, it was imprudent. Where I went wrong, I think the misjudgment that I took was in not taking the precautions, if you like, against the time when this became public knowledge.
Yes, but there's the other point of the Code of Conduct for Ministers, which says that if there's any doubt at all, whether or not there's an inquiry going on with Mr. Robinson, you should have gone to the Permanent Secretary and at least sought his advice and said why you're not doing anything. Do you think you got that wrong now?
I think I did get that wrong, and what I should have done is, having stood aside, having made it clear to my Permanent Secretary and my officials that I wanted nothing to do with this inquiry, that it should be left entirely to officials, I should then, a little alarm bell should have gone off in my head, and I should then have gone on and said to my Permanent Secretary, look, by the way, I have this loan, I am the Secretary of State. People might put those two things together and may feel that, you know, it's unacceptable. Now, I should have foreseen that,
Well,
and I should have taken...
explain now why the alarm bell didn't go off.
I can't explain, no.
Do you feel, in a sense, of all this, that your enemies have won? You've got people, you know that there are people who don't like you very much out there. There's been, obviously, this leak to the newspapers about this inquiry. Do you feel your enemies have won?
No, I don't feel that my enemies have won. I feel that in taking the action I have, I feel that my reputation and my integrity have won, that the standards that the Prime Minister rightly insisted on in our government have won, and that the government's standing with the rest of the country have won. I think all those things are intact, and there is nothing more important to me than my integrity, nothing more important to me than the government's standing, and quite honestly, I'll pay any price to protect those things, and I think I have today in what I've done.
As Mr. Blair reflects on all this at Chequers, we're told that he believes that what's happened is for the best, even to the point of seeing one of his closest friends for now destroyed. Michael Brunson, News at 10, Westminster.
The 1997 landslide has already secured Peter Mandelson his place in the political history books, even if his ministerial career is now in tatters. It was the culmination of years of work to shift Labour to the right and reclaim a great swathe of lost voters.
I think he'd been working to modernise the Labour Party at quite a pace from 1985, and what happened when Tony Blair became leader and out-and-out moderniser is that we had Peter Mandelson's campaigning skills allied to a leader who was absolutely committed to modernisation. And the fusion of that meant that the new Labour could be created and went on to gain the biggest election victory since the war.
Even Blairite loyalists have been heard to complain that their leader has often seemed too dependent on Peter Mandelson. But in government, the relationship has changed, and now must change again.
Although I think the Prime Minister will continue to take advice from Mr. Mandelson, although perhaps he won't acknowledge it publicly, it won't be the same relationship, the same heavy dependence that Tony Blair has had on him in the past, because he's matured, he's got much more political experience. He needed Peter Mandelson most just after John Smith's death, which caught him by surprise when he was a young and relatively inexperienced politician, and lent very heavily on him, and now he's got other sources of advice to turn to.
Peter Mandelson earned his wings masterminding the 1987 general election campaign for Neil Kinnock. He modernised Labour's presentation and helped to deliver the most polished and accomplished defeat in the party's history.
We fought a marvellous campaign, a real stormer of a campaign, one of which we're immensely proud and will not be forgotten by the party or the country for decades.
Never knowingly undersold, his ambition was always to move on to a job in government. And in 1997 the call came, a job as minister without portfolio. He could, he said, now emerge from the shadows, no longer the backroom political fixer and media manipulator.
We're off camera. Off camera. Off camera. Off camera.
His only tangible responsibility was another piece of showbiz. The Millennium Dome is worth several streets of Notting Hill real estate. But the grandson of Herbert Morrison, the Labour minister who pioneered the 1951 Festival of Britain, had a sense of destiny about the project, and he'll be deeply upset that he's now been stripped of it. Advancement to the cabinet came about as quickly as Tony Blair could decently deliver it. In July, Peter Mandelson was made Trade Secretary. He'd been in the job only 150 days, but already made his mark watering down trade union legislation and promoting exemptions to the minimum wage.
There's no need to pretend that the trade unions and the government have identical views on every issue, or that in every respect the trade unions are entirely happy with what we are doing.
Peter Mandelson brought the friendly to business element to a whole new pitch, and that caused some concern because we thought he was getting it out of balance. But nonetheless, I imagine there'll be continuity of policy broadly.
The felling of one of the 3 biggest trees in the new Labour forest is an historic moment in politics. His many enemies in the party will be chuckling over their Christmas turkeys, but it's a measure of the success of the transformation which Peter Mandelson led with Gordon Brown and Tony Blair that nobody is suggesting Labour policy will change one jot, and nobody's saying he won't be back.
Turning to domestic politics, it's been a difficult 2 or 3 weeks. Isn't the truth of what's happened over this business that finally the new Labour bubble has burst and the punters are saying they're just the same as the Tories, they're just as sleazy as the Tories?
Events like those of the last 2 weeks, I don't dismiss them, but we should get them in perspective. Events like this happen to governments, but what really matters is to get the fundamentals right. Long-term interest rates are now 4.25%. That's what really matters. We're getting the hospital waiting list down, the whole range of other problems to sort out, but we're getting there. There's 100,000 kids in class sizes under 30 this September that otherwise wouldn't have been. We've still got another 400,000 to go, but we're getting there. Crime, we're going to get there. Youth unemployment, 30% fall in it. We're getting there. Now, these are the big fundamental questions. And of course, we don't sort everything out in 19 months, but I am confident about the future of Britain, and I'm confident of the sense of purpose and direction of the government.
But you went for the jugular with the Tories over sleaze, didn't you? You really clashed them over it. Aren't people now, as I said, aren't they going to say, nothing's changed? Isn't this a very unsavoury business that's been going on, that it does have an impact?
No, because look, in all governments, you'll get difficulties in the personal lives of particular ministers. The important thing is to act on them, and we did act on them. But in the end, the real fundamentals are to give a sense of vision and purpose and direction for the country. That means getting to a situation where those long-term interest rates, 4.25%, are actually the interest rates for the country, where we are sorting out not just the hospital waiting lists that are now falling in the health service, but all the problems of the health service, where we're getting our education system fit for the 21st century. Youth unemployment's dropped by 30%. Under this Labour government as a result of the New Deal. But there's a whole lot more to do for the long-term unemployed. So I'm not dismissing any of these things that have happened. But in the end, the country should have confidence in the direction and purpose of the government.
But they're what people are talking about, are they? And with respect, they're not talking about the sort of issues that you've just raised. They're talking about Peter Mandelson's loan. They're talking about, is there a rift between you and Gordon Brown? Are the spin doctors out of control? That's what people are saying, isn't it?
Of course, when these things happen, the media go into a great sort of orgy of indulgence, particularly when it's to do with spin doctors and all the rest of that rubbish. But in the end...
Is it rubbish?
Well, it is rubbish in the end. I don't dismiss what has happened in relation to particular ministers, but it is rubbish in the sense that those things that really matter to the future of the country, has Britain got an optimistic, bright, confident future for the 21st century? Our men are curing boom and bust for the economy. That's to say, long-term interest rates, 4.25%. That's the best they've been for over 30 years. That's a big achievement. In the National Health Service and schools, from this April, we've got the largest ever investment going in. We've got hospital waiting lists now coming down. We've got class sizes coming down. Yes, we've got nurses recruitment, teaching recruitment still to sort out, but give us a bit of time, we'll sort that out too.
A couple more points. Everybody's talking about a rift between yourself and the Chancellor. Is there a rift between Downing Street and the Treasury, and specifically between yourself and Mr. Brown?
Every time people have asked me about this, and you guys have been trying to run this story about me and Gordon from time immemorial, there's probably never been a Chancellor or Prime Minister who worked more closely together. And the important thing is we're delivering on the things that really matter for Britain. And those things which include the possibility, for the first time, certainly in my memory, of a stable, low inflationary environment with interest rates, long-term interest rates now 4.25%. At the same time, we've cured the big budget deficit, yet we're managing to get this extra money into schools and hospitals from this April, the new deal for the unemployed, the new help that's going to be given from this October for low-income families, the minimum wage that's going to come in to give people some hope for the future. Now, I know that you guys in the media are more interested in rifts and spin doctors and all the rest of it, but in the end, these things come and go. What is important is the future direction and optimism for the country, and I have that.
When will Mr. Mandelson be back? When will you rehabilitate him? Does he have a future in the Cabinet again?
Peter Mandelson's resigned. That's all I intend to say. That's all
You
I have
left the
said.
door open for him, or you appeared to.
The future will take care of itself, but I'm not going to speculate on it.
Prime Minister, thank you.